Middle of the country, but not middle of the road opinions. It's the podcast dedicated to sports in the air capital of the world.
I'm going to Wichita!
Wichita, Kansas, and beyond. With Tommy Castor and Weston Mills, this is Keeper of the Games.
Hey, what's up? This is Keeper of the Games. We are the wildly underqualified yet mildly entertaining sports podcast all about sports in the air capital of Wichita, Kansas, and beyond. Along with Weston Mills, I'm Tommy Castor, back for another episode of Keeper of the Games on this National Dog Day of all days. I mean, we're recording it on National Dog Day. By the time the show goes live, it won't be, but we're celebrating dogs today on the show. Weston, how are things going, man?
Good. Can't complain too much on National Dog Day, right? I mean, that's I was telling you before the show, I actually won some concert tickets on dog trivia. Well, the question wasn't about dogs, but the answer involved dogs. So won myself some tickets for September of 2021.
Very nice. That's pretty cool. And it had to do with dogs, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think the question was something along the lines of 62% of people find a first date more attractive if they have this item, and the answer was a dog. So
fair enough. And I believe that question. I mean, that's a pretty smart move. Congratulations on that. I figured on National Dog Day we could at least have a cameo from my dog Lucy. She's kind of been squirming. She's been squirming around. She's not going to hang out on my lap for very long. I think she's going to go lay down. But I think Lucy wanted to say hi here on Keeper of the Games for National Dog Day.
I've got Miley in the room. People kind of have to move my camera here. She's in her bed. She's not interested in making a cameo herself. So I'll take the camera to her.
You know, I think in some cases our dogs might have better opinions on things than we do. But that's okay. We'll still do a show regardless. Hey, don't forget, if you want to listen to this show all the time and get notified whenever we have a brand new episode, all you have to do is just hit that subscribe button. That way, you'll get a notification anytime we have a brand new episode of Keeper of the Games. You can find us on platforms like iTunes and Google Podcasts. We're also on iHeartRadio, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, and many others. That way, you won't miss a single episode of Keeper of the Games. Also, don't forget to check us out on Facebook and YouTube. Also, our website at KOGpod.weebly.com. You can watch full episodes there. So if you're interested in seeing Lucy and Miley, you can go on to our website or Facebook and YouTube by searching for Keeper of the Games and watching full episodes there. Of course, you can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at KOGpod. That's at KOGpod. So we're done talking about National Dog Day for now. We're done talking about all the ways that you can connect with us. Now it's time to dive in to some sports that affect and impact people here in the air capital of Wichita, Kansas. We're starting with USD 259. So that's been the big topic here in the air capital for the last several days or so about what's going to be happening with the fall sports season for the Wichita Public School District. There's been a lot of controversy surrounding it. If you followed the news in Wichita at all over the last week, surely you have heard about all of this drama about, the Board of Education deciding that fall sports were going to be canceled for this season because the criteria is in a certain level as far as in-person learning versus remote learning for the fall semester due to COVID-19. And then it's just kind of exploded from there with parents and students and supporters protesting around the city, trying to get the board to reverse that decision. And just a lot going on, a lot of back and forth about all of this. There's a lot to unpack here with this, Weston. What were your initial thoughts kind of knowing about how this process has played out over the last week or so?
Yeah, so I want to start with kind of what the last little phrase you said there, Tommy, is the process, because to me, I understand there's going to be opinions all across the board on whether I guess you should play or not play and this and that. But to me, the most disappointing thing with all of this is the process, right? Is that they did not even give these kids, one, a chance to be heard. Two, the athletic director for the district was supposed to submit a proposal at that meeting, which decisions were made. He didn't even get to speak. And that was, they had actually asked him to put this proposal. And I don't know that it was a proposal, as more as just information, but was asked to put that forward. Didn't get a chance to do that. And then really, I guess number three, and this is kind of the whole of the matter, they let these kids practice all summer long with certain guidelines. And then they didn't even give them a chance There was no try, there was no effort, there was just a cancellation of the season. So to me, I think the most absolute disappointing thing was the process in which these kids felt like they were asked to do certain things. They did them, they followed them all summer long, and then they weren't even given a chance, not even given a chance to compete at their sport. And to me, that is the center of this whole thing and what disappointed me the most about the outcomes that have occurred.
You know, we've seen examples over the last 3 or 4 months or so of sports being successfully or at least semi-successfully played. And obviously, we're not talking about minors. We're not talking about people under the age of 18. We're talking about professionals that are getting paid a lot of money in some cases to go out and play. There are exceptions to that, and there are some local exceptions to that. The Shrine Bowl was played, a couple of months ago. The NBC World Series was played earlier this month. There have been examples of sports being able to be successfully completed and at least, given an opportunity for those players to get out on the field and play the sport that they love. In this situation, I really think that there was so much confusion and so much uncertainty, and nobody knew exactly what to do. And I think in a lot of cases, I'm going to go ahead and throw, the board under the bus a little bit here. I think they didn't necessarily want to deal with protocols. They didn't necessarily want to set parameters. They didn't want to set guidelines. They didn't want to say, all right, here's what's going to have to happen for these sports to be played successfully. I think they just said, shut it down. We're just not going to do it. We're not going to take the risk. We're not going to have the liability on our shoulders. We're just going to go ahead and shut it down. And I think that's really what we're faced with here. And I doubt that I seriously doubt the board had any inclination that there would be as big of a backlash as there has been the last week.
Tommy, and this is a perfect time for me to interject because I'm going to probably do the most media thing I've ever done. I was told this last week by someone who I would believe would have the information about this, that there were board members that didn't know when they made that vote that even canceled sports, and that there were also board members that didn't even know sports had been practicing all summer, which, look, it makes my blood boil. And I'm going to give them a quick little break, and then I'm going to go right back into this because, look, I understand to some degree this is a position that is not paid, but it is an elected position. You chose to take on this task, and by all means, you represent a group of people anytime you were voted for, and to not do your job the way you were voted to do it is an absolute disgrace in my mind. Now, again, this is, if you would have told me that they did X, Y, Z, they examined this procedure, they examined this, protocol, and just determined that it wasn't going to be safe. Okay, I might disagree with it, but I could live with that. Just every single indication is that is not what happened. And I think to your point, Tommy, exactly they just didn't want to deal with it. They couldn't have done anything more to show their true colors than what they did after all the players, parents, coaches had pretty much protested all week, sent thousands and thousands of emails from what I've heard to the board members. And two things. One, they specifically asked for folks this was after the second Monday meeting, just most recent Monday meeting. They specifically asked folks to no longer email the Board of Education members so that they could get their work done, which pisses me off to no end because that is your damn job, is to answer those emails, to be responsive to the people in that just blows my mind that was even possibly said. And then second, what did they do? They decided to form a COVID task force to look into whether this is, viable. And it is exactly, Tommy, what you said. They're just passing the buck off to someone else. So here's what they can do now. Whatever this COVID task force comes back and says, they can either say, hey, we didn't make this decision. The COVID task force said it wasn't viable to play. Or they can say, oh, they said it was safe to play, so we followed them. And hey, yeah, now there's liability here and there, but it wasn't us. We didn't make that decision, which is just complete complete BS to me. I mean, I don't know. I'm not even in Wichita. I think you mentioned the same thing. I don't know anyone playing Wichita high school sports. I do have some coaches that I'm fairly close with, but I don't have any players, so I don't feel like I truly have a dog in this fight. And I just think it is complete embarrassment, the process in which this Board of Education went forward for USD 259 and the athletes in that district.
This whole scenario that's gone on in the last week for USD 259, for Wichita Public Schools, for the players, the coaches, the parents, the board members, this whole situation is a microcosm, and it's a microcosm of what is happening in our country today. Now, we're not going to get off on a tangent and talk about overall leadership in this country and talk about the different things that have been put into place as far as mandates and recommendations and so on and so forth. We're not going to dive into that and get into that. We're talking about sports on a local level, but this is a microcosm and an example of what has been happening nationwide, where you have a group of individuals that, and in some cases, I do sympathize with them a little bit in the fact that nobody knows what the hell they're doing. Nobody knows what the right or wrong thing to do is. It's just sort of like, the example I've used is walking through a dark room without a flashlight and hoping that you don't run into anything. That's really what has been happening. But at the same time, you still have to be held accountable for the decisions that you've made as a Board of Education. Now, I guarantee you there are board members probably on any board, any school board around the country that would say, you know what, at the end of the day, sports are not that important. It's all about the classroom. It's all about the academics, et cetera, et cetera. I'm here to tell you, and I think you would back me up on this, sports are an integral part of a young person's development, especially at the high school level. The problem is that you've got this Board of Education that, they pass the buck. They have done, these different things, to try to, basically just shut down the fall sports season for these kids. And then they're not listening to anything. They're not listening to any rebuttals. They basically have said, this is what we're going to do, and leave us alone and shut up and don't email us anymore. That's really disappointing. But in the same way that this is a microcosm of the entire country about how this whole thing has been handled, one other thing that's very similar is that these board members, they hold elected positions, elected offices. Yep. And the best thing to do is to elect them, to vote them out, get them out of office. That's the biggest recourse that these parents, and you know what? Some of these kids are almost 18, will be 18, just turned 18. The best thing that you can do is vote these people out, in the same way that people nationwide, if they don't like the way that this whole crisis has been handled, then they can make a change with their vote on a national level. So I think there are so many parallels between the way that this has been handled locally and the way this whole pandemic has been handled nationally.
Yeah, I'm going to echo. I mean, I think you and I are kind of bouncing back and forth. I think we're really on the same page on the way this all played out. But, I want to touch on a topic that I think is important to address, because you're right. There are so many people that echo out there, this is just a game. It's just sports. And that might be the case at the professional level, and even at the college level, which might be the reverse of what people think, but I think it might be even more important at the high school level. It is more than just a game at the high school level. I mean, you truly do. And whether people want to believe it or not, I'm telling you, it is true. You have kids that would not graduate high school if they weren't trying to make grades just to stay on a team. You absolutely have kids that would not go to college if they didn't get to play their senior sports season and get noticed by a recruiter. And this isn't the D1 kids. This isn't the D2 kids even. Those kids they're gonna be seen. Colleges see that. It's the kid that barely makes it to a JUCO. It's the kid that goes on to play NAI. It's the kid that goes on to play Division III that wouldn't otherwise maybe even not even go to college. It is bigger than that. And then, truly just, especially at the high school level, I don't know, maybe this makes me sound like an old man, but keeping kids even out of trouble, just giving them something to do that is positive, it is so important. And I think that those are things that need to be discussed. And look, if you as someone who is weighing whether it should or, sports should or shouldn't be played, that's fine if you think that those certain things maybe shouldn't hold as much weight as others. I completely understand that. but they need to at least be given weight, in this discussion, as a whole. And, I think there's going to be some other interesting things that come out of this. I have a pretty good relationship with Coach Mark Marinelli, who is the defensive coordinator at Northwest High School. He was my defensive line coach at Andale. I think he was there 3 of the 4 years I was at Andale, and stayed in contact with him ever since. But, he's talked about he has had 8 players already leave the program, or at least told him that they were leaving the program, trying to transfer out of district to go play and get that opportunity to be looked at. And I think that's going to be interesting to see, what happens to USC 259. I mean, what kind of repercussions do decisions like this have on the district as a whole? I mean, I think there's going to be some, for sure, blowback if USC 259 doesn't get this straightened out.
There are so many ramifications. I mean, so many different things that happen. It's like the trickle down effect. You make this one big decision and it totally impacts all these other things. And I want to go back to the transfer topic here in just a couple of minutes. But, you were talking about kids that, without sports, and we're not just talking about football here. We're talking about volleyball and track and field and golf and swimming and tennis and, all of these other sports out there that are potentially impacted by this decision, at least the ones, in the fall sports season, and kids that may not go to college without sports. And I saw this on KWCH Channel 12 the other day. They did a story and they were talking to a kid by the name of Zaire Adkins, who actually plays at Northwest. He's a senior for Northwest. And I just want to read you his quote. I watched the story. It was so poignant to me that I had to go online and find it. And my heart hurts for this kid and for others like him. He says, "It's been hard because my whole life I've been building, trying to go to college, trying to play football, go to the next level. And without that, I don't really know what to do." If he doesn't have the opportunity to play, he might not have the opportunity to go to college. Isn't that the most important thing? But when you're getting a kid graduated, is to get them to the next level. I'm not talking about sports. I'm not talking about playing at the next level. I'm talking about going to the next level. It's about going to college. It's about finding a good job, or it's about going to the military. It's about that next step and preparing students for that. And for this particular student, his path was football. That's potentially taken away from him, considering he's a senior and he could very well not have a season. How's he going to get recruited? How's he going to make it to college? How's he going to get an education? I'm very critical of the NCAA as a whole. We know this. It's been well documented. What I'm not critical of are kids that are wanting to complete their education, who are wanting to go to the next level and have an opportunity to do something they're good at and do something that's fun for them while also getting an education. I will always be 100% in support of that. And that's just one of the major ramifications that I think that's what's so shameful about this from the Board of Education. You just mentioned a few minutes ago that, some of them did not even know that the decision that they made would be canceling the fall football season. Look at what that decision is doing. It's insane. It's asinine. And I'm just going to repeat what I said before. The best recourse is to vote those people out.
Yeah, and that's a perfect transition into what I wanted to talk about anyways, because I think, and you kind of mentioned it, but I think a second aspect of what's disappointing to me is that, they are elected officials and the decisions they made affect people who, 98% of those students were probably not, maybe even more than that, were not 18, in time to vote, for the actually all those, I guess every single one of those were elected in. I think last year when I looked up, I think there was 4 of them coming up in 2022 for reelection.
Right.
So nobody who is in high school right now would have even had an opportunity to, vote on these people, which, I get it. I'm not advocating that we need to lower the voting age or anything like that. But the frustrating part is that when they went about the process of saying, look, we want to be heard. They protested. They wanted to have that meeting on Monday. They called the meeting on Monday, and for the Board of Education to say, okay, well, we'll have a task force and they can make a decision or give us a recommendation. has got to be so deflating to 14 to 18-year-old kids that are being taught and told, use your voice. Here's how we do things in this country. Here is how, you make yourself heard. This is the right way to go about things. And they've just got to feel deflated that the process just absolutely let them down, that they weren't heard. I mean, and I will say, I do want to, for any of those kids that listen to this podcast and get a chance to hear what we're saying, I think you did, I know that you did way more, than you can probably process. It maybe feels like you didn't get anywhere, but those voices were heard, to the fact that meeting was called on the Monday, the fact that you even forced a COVID task force, to be put together, that is something. And I know it's, right now, as we're sitting here, there's no decisions made and you're still feeling deflected, but, you got to be positive about at least the small amount of change that was made and your voice was heard. And without that, I don't think if it wouldn't have been for the actual students being involved, if it was just parents, I'm not so sure that the Board of Education just, puts hands over their ears, covers their eyes, and, says, whenever we said we were going to re-talk about this in 9 weeks, we'll re-talk about it then. I think they felt the need to answer to the children that they allegedly serve.
Right. Well, this is probably, I'm looking at a macro level here. I'm looking at from 30,000 feet. This is an incredibly transformative time, not just locally, not just regionally, nationally. It's a very transformative time on a variety of issues. You and I were talking about this before we came on the air of just, we're kind of exhausted. There's so much going on. As we record this, we've got NBA teams and Major League Baseball teams that are boycotting, due to police violence and police brutality and, for racial justice and all of that. That's all going on as we speak. At a local level, you've got these kids that are protesting for a right to play the game that they love and the game that they're good at and the game that they're dedicated to and focused on. They've been practicing for the last several months. There are just so many avenues now that players have for their voices to be heard. Weston, it wasn't that long ago that at a professional level, there were people telling NBA players to shut up and dribble, we don't want to hear your voice. We don't want to hear what you have to say. Now players, their voices mean something. And I think that mentality from a professional level has trickled down some to an amateur level. And now you're seeing NCAA players that are standing up and they're trying to fight for their causes. You've got, locally here in Wichita, you've got high school students that are using their voice as well. It's an incredibly transformative time. And it's all because of, a short-sighted decision that was made. Again, I think we've said this a lot on this show, neither one of us are saying that this virus is overblown or it's not something to be taken seriously. It's not something that, there needs to be, different decisions made on. Absolutely it is. But I think that you and I are most disappointed, and you said it before, in the process, not in the actual decision. I think we're disappointed in that, but we're most disappointed in the process and the way that it happened. I do have to say, like we talked about, there are so many different ramifications that kind of trickle down from this. And one of them you mentioned just a few minutes ago, and that is players that potentially are going to transfer to other districts or other schools to play their senior season, considering that, there are a lot of schools in the Wichita area, suburban schools, private schools, parochial schools that are still going to be played as of now. There was a story done on Channel 12 where they interviewed a couple of parents, and I want to hear from them. We're going to hear from Eric Hopper is one, and then also Dayla Larson is the other. We're going to hear from both of them about their thoughts on what they're going to do as they're talking about will their kids transfer or not.
They've been practicing all summer, and suddenly the rug was pulled out from under him, and he still wants to play. So he said, "Dad, I want to go to Goddard."
We have called around. We've talked to different schools, both private, both out of district. At this point, they're saying if they are sitting in front of a computer at home for 7 hours a day and they have no sports to go to at night, that's not acceptable to them.
I don't want my kids having class in my basement on a computer for 8 hours a day and not involved in athletics or student council or band or any of those things that they're both involved in.
So, and those are just two parents out of probably hundreds of parents, if not more, that are talking about what are they going to do for their students or for their kids? Are they going to stick it out? I know that Keisha announced that there's going to be some kind of alternative plan to where, some of these seasons can be made up in the spring for different sports. So do they stick it out? Do they, ride it out and play in the spring, or do they transfer and go somewhere else? The one thing that I think is just insane to me is that you've got these public schools in Wichita that are saying, nope, we're not going to do it. It's not safe. But yet it's okay for schools like Bishop Carroll to play and Cave and Mount Carmel to play and Andover to play and Mays to play, Goddard. I mean, all the suburban schools, it's okay, but it's not okay if you're in the public school system. What are your thoughts on parents who are kind of riding that wave of maybe we need to think about our kids transferring out of Wichita public schools?
I think you can't blame any parent for making a decision for their kid, right? And I think that it kind of in part, I think that's the other side to this discussion about, look, if the Board of Education, I feel like, this is maybe my personal opinion that maybe other people don't share, but the Board of Education and the school district, their job is really to keep kids safe and to provide the things that the school district says they're going to provide, which is both learning and extracurricular, and to do that in a safe manner. And then to me, I think it's the parent's job to say, in a situation like this, look, Johnny, I understand Southeast is going to have football this year. We don't feel it's safe for you to play. We don't want you to play, and that to be the parent's decision, and so I think that kind of comes the same way here. Like, if you want your kid to carry on, and this is more than just, should they be playing a sport or do they have college opportunities? Just like that dad said, man, I don't want my kid to sit in a basement for 8 hours in front of a laptop, and then 4 o'clock rolls around or 3:30. And they're then going to do what? Transition upstairs to the couch to watch TV after school's done? I mean, those are just as serious, different levels, I guess, but those are health concerns or, mental health issue concerns or just parenting concerns that have to be discussed and dealt with. And I can't blame any parent for wanting to do that. And I think probably, like you mentioned, though, with having all these schools surrounding Wichita playing, that has to feel even more deflating for these kids, saying you didn't even try. I mean, look, everybody else is going to give it a go. Why can't we just give it a go? It's not like we're asking to be the one school district in the state of Kansas to play. We're asking to be the one school district in the state of Kansas to avoid not playing. That's all we're asking, just to be treated like everyone else. So I think that's really frustrating. And, and I even remember we had this conversation kind of as we were looking forward to high school sports, and it probably was, probably 8 episodes ago now, and I had kind of mentioned that I thought that the rural communities were actually going to have an easier time to go forward just because of less cases in the metro. Or less cases than what's going on in the Wichita Metro. But I said, I think Wichita is probably going to have the resources to handle it better than a rural community. And it feels like they're not even, trying to utilize the resources that they have, with the process that was put forward here.
We've talked about it quite a bit when, in regards to other sports. And we talked about it, I think last week, about the NCAA and the Big Ten and the Pac-12. And, it's liability, right? They don't want to be liable for an outbreak on, a football squad where half the team goes down and, then they spread it around. And it's all about liability. It's not about mitigation. It's not about protocols. It's not about let's try to find a way to make it work. It's about avoiding liability. That's really where we stand right now, in this country. And that's simply what it is. Back on the transfer note, there are a lot of families that are talking about that, but it's not that simple. If you actually move your family out of district, it makes it a lot easier. Right. But if you're trying to transfer them to another school where you're not actually in that district, the player runs the risk of having to set out for an entire year with the Keisha rules. It was USD 259 athletic director Jay Means talking about how it could be kind of tricky for a lot of players to want to transfer.
A rule, if you do not make a bona fide move, but you change schools, then you're going to be setting out a year. And that rule was just changed to come in effect this year. So those are still the policies that are in place from Keisha.
The thing about this is that I feel like if the school board is going to make a decision that the fall sports season is done, they're not even going to try, then they need to appeal to KOGpod, or KOGpod needs to make an emergency declaration waiving that transfer rule, saying that if people want to transfer out, let them transfer out for this 1 year only, because we're not giving them the opportunity to play in their current district. We'll let them go somewhere else. If that doesn't happen and they don't waive that for this particular circumstance, then that's egregious in my opinion. I would be a total advocate for that.
I agree with you, and given the circumstances that we're in, I absolutely would want that to be in place. But if that happens, now USD 259's poor decision, poor process is going to start affecting other players in other districts. I mean, I would feel for the kid who has worked his butt off, to just be good enough to maybe play as a senior. And now, a kid from Northwest who's a stud, maybe played 4 years at Northwest and is just going to miss out on his transfers in and starts over a kid. And and I certainly wouldn't suggest that shouldn't happen given the circumstances, but now this is starting to have ramifications to, USC 267, and you're talking Bishop Carroll, right. You're talking, other schools now that are feeling the effects of a kid who misses his senior season because of this. So given the circumstances, I'm still with you. I think that, you should give a kid an opportunity to go play. And then maybe, I guess, at that point, it's probably going to be on coaches of these schools to say, look, you're a fantastic player. We'd love to have you. I can't guarantee you're starting, but at least you're here and have the opportunity to play. But I got to give it to my guy who's, been with our program for 4 years, but you also realistically know that's not going to happen. There are going to be kids who then miss out on their senior seasons because so-and-so transferred in and lost his spot. So, just poor ramifications trickle down from all of this all across the board. I think the best case scenario, Rod, is that next Monday they say, okay, we've been given the protocols and we're going to go ahead and greenlight this. I think that's really the only way out of the situation. I think the scheduling can be fixed for sure. That feels pretty minor at this point, just to be able to get back and correct it and try to work something out from there.
It was a week ago we were talking about that the City League, they were just going to play league opponents, and that's it. That was 1 week ago. And here's where we are 7 days later. I would love to know, I'd love to be a fly on the wall with area schools, and maybe some that are even located in Wichita, Bishop Carroll, Caping, Collegiate, Independent, some of these other schools, and then even suburban schools, to see if how many phone calls they've gotten from parents who are looking to transfer their kids in. I guarantee you that there are families that are saying, look, I want my son or my daughter to play their senior year of whatever sport it is. We can try to afford the tuition for collegiate for one year, to have them be able to play their sport, and then we're done. I can see that happening quite a bit. The final thing I'm going to mention, and I want to leave this with you and with our listeners out there, and it kind of puts kind of a sad bow, I think, on this entire situation before we move on. How many times, Weston, have you heard over the course of your life, in the time that you followed NFL football, have you heard professional football players, or let's even broaden it out and say athletes in general, professional basketball players, professional baseball players, professional athletes in general, how many times have you heard them say, if it wasn't for sports, I would have joined a gang, I would be in jail, I would be dead? It happens all the time. Sports is that avenue for these people, for these players to be able to stay out of trouble. I'm not super concerned. I'm not as concerned about if, let's say, Andover tomorrow canceled their season. I'm not super concerned about someone in an affluent suburban neighborhood staying out of trouble. They might get into some trouble. I'm most concerned about those players in the inner city urban community that don't have that avenue anymore. What path are they going to go down? It's, you mentioned a couple of minutes ago that, surely there are parents that are concerned about their kid doing school on their laptop all day and then laying on the couch and watching TV, and that's not good. And I totally agree with you, but let's take it a step further. This is incredibly detrimental to the potential and to the health and to the safety of these high school students that may not have any other positive reinforcement anywhere in their life. And now it's gone. It's completely gone. That, I think, is the biggest ramification from all of this. And that's something that I hope and I pray that the Board of Education thinks about when they make their next decision, when they have their next meeting.
Yeah, I think you ended that perfectly where I want to end it too. And two things I want to touch on. One, so exactly like you said, I think on a much broader discussion, there is already discussions being had about inner city schools. And this is not just about the athletics. It's just about inner city schools, struggling because of, folks wanting to move to the suburbs where the school districts always tend to be better. Small things like this do have ripple effects to continue to make that problem worse. And I am just talking about school, not sports, not even necessarily the kids in it. I'm talking about the school district itself. If you are not providing what the parents of those children want, they're no longer going to stay in your school district. And those tax dollars leave. And then the money that you're already struggling with within your district becomes a whole lot tighter when you don't have taxpayers in that district because they want their kids to be in a better environment in wherever that other school district may be. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, a lot of people use the term rural flight to talk about people leaving small towns.
Right.
I think it's urban flight too. I mean, people are leaving those environments where they can go 15 or 20 minutes away and have a much better environment for their families. And that's completely a different topic than just sports, but it does tie in for sure.
Right. Okay. So, and then here's where I want to end it as well, because we are completely on the same page on this, Tommy. And to me, this is the most disappointing thing. And I think the frustrating thing. And then where I would like to see it go forward is everything that we talked about. And you mentioned, hey, I just hope the Board of Education takes this into consideration when they're making future decisions. That right there has been our problem. That right there is what you and I don't like, is this process. If they had gone through all of this, there had been folks able to come in from day one and present their case. You had the Board of Education said, okay, we hear you. Now we're going to go to so-and-so doctor to talk about what he thinks about the safety of football, what he thinks about the safety of volleyball, and then had coaches come in and say, okay, we hear that. We can do this. We can do that. Look, to be honest, I don't know if we can do that. I don't know if that's realistic. If all that conversation had been in front of everyone, and then the Board of Education said, look, we just don't think it's viable, I could live with that. I would still, my own personal opinion is I would probably still disagree with it, but I could live with it. I mean, I feel like these kids didn't even get that opportunity. And so that's where I think the perfect place to kind of move away from this discussion is, you and I are both in the same sentiment that we hope all these voices, all these concerns have now been heard, at least to some degree. And that is at least taken into consideration when this next decision comes down Monday, along with whatever this COVID task force comes up with, because there's more than just, whether a game of football or a game of volleyball can be played in September of 2020. There's more than just that to be considered here.
Yeah, if I was a parent and, I had a son or a daughter that wanted to play their sport and they got canceled and they were devastated, and I was told they can play, but there can be no fans to show up, I would say that's fine. Absolutely. As long as they can play, that's all that matters to me. I don't have to be there. There are so many other things that go into consideration. And, you and I we've given impassioned speeches and rants about things on this show before. We've been in disagreement with each other about them, but you and I are in lockstep with this, and I'm not sure that we've been as impassioned about anything else on this program. I tweeted it a few days ago, and I think you mentioned it a little bit ago. I don't have any kids, I don't even know any Wichita high school athletes. I'm not involved in that world at all. I don't have a dog in the fight, but my heart hurts for them. My heart hurts for their families. My heart hurts for the coaches, for anybody that has a vested interest in that. My heart hurts for them. And, we've talked about this for 40 minutes on this program. And I think we probably could have talked about it for longer, but we're definitely on the same page, and our thoughts go out to those athletes who don't get a chance to play.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. That's all I was going to add. Mm-hmm.
For sure. Well, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk a little bit about Kansas City Royals. We have been talking about them the last few weeks and kind of giving recaps about how the week has gone. And it's kind of been an up and down, inconsistent week. Not a whole lot has changed with Kansas City from last week to this week. They had kind of a disappointing series, I think you would say, over the weekend against the Minnesota Twins. However, they came from behind and won a really exciting game on Tuesday night against the Cardinals in the I-70 series. Brad Keller pitched another pretty good game. The bats came alive at the end, and the Royals were able to get the win 5-4. They stand, I believe, aren't they 11-17 or 12-17, somewhere around there. How would you assess the first half of the season for Kansas City? Are you going to stick with your phrase of just they're inconsistent?
Yeah, gosh, I have to continue to echo that method or that message, because I just feel like they have proven time again. I mean, they lose 2-3 to the Twins, then they, split with the Cardinals. Now Game 3 is going on right now, but they're beating good baseball teams, and they're losing to good baseball teams. They're beating bad baseball teams, and they're losing to bad baseball teams. I mean, it just continues to be, and even it almost seems like on an individual player level, maybe minus Whit Merrifield and a few guys in the bullpen, you've seen hot bats, you've seen cold bats, you've seen, good pitching, you've seen bad pitching. In particular, one guy I do want to point out, because Tommy, I think you called him out on the last episode, was Jorge Soler. He's been hitting the cover off the baseball ever since Tommy Castor said he wasn't hitting very well. So he's had a nice little turnaround. And, one assessment, if you want to look at or just have the conversation, is, how does this team compare to last year's team? I think anybody who's been watching can clearly see this baseball team is definitely better. I think they definitely played a tougher schedule, but the talent is by far and away greater on this year's team than it was on the past, I guess, really 2 years, where they've lost 100 games, and I think the biggest reason why too, and it seems pretty clear, is, the bullpen this year has just been so much better than it has last year. And I'm going to give a shout out to Alec Lewis, who writes for The Athletic. He tweeted this out on Twitter. The Royals bullpen in late/close situations in 2019, in 137 innings pitched, they had a 6.64 ERA, and walked 76 batters and only struck out 136. In 2020, in late/close situations, which I don't exactly know what the criteria is for that, but either way, as long as it's the same, it doesn't matter. So in 2020, and this is only in 27 innings pitched, they have a 1.98 ERA.
It's a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually the strikeout to walk ratio is about the same, but I mean, just even the ERA right there is just enough to let you know how different they are. They've got some power arms back in the bullpen, and one guy who I think we're probably going to talk about a little bit is who's done well is Trevor Rosenthal, who closed the door on that Cardinals win the other night against his former team.
Yeah, you mentioned this Royals team, your assessment is that they're better than they were this year, and the stats back that up too. At the halfway point last year, obviously it's comparing apples and oranges because you played 162 games a season ago, but at the halfway point last year, the Royals were they only won 28 games in the first half of the season last year. They're 12-18 right now. They're only 4 games out of a playoff spot. They're actually pacing better than the 2019 Royals did. On top of that, like you mentioned, they've played a really tough schedule. They've played a lot of really good baseball teams. In fact, 22 of the Royals' 30 games have been against teams that have a winning record. So for the fact that they've been able to get out of the first season or the first half of the season at 12-18 against some really good baseball teams, I think is encouraging for the future for sure. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of inconsistency. You just don't know what you're going to get from night in to night out. We saw the Royals offense come alive on Tuesday night against the Cardinals. The bats had kind of laid dormant for a few nights before that. So, it just from one night to another, you're not really able to see, the Royals really string together, a long stretch of wins. That's what you're going to need to see for the second half of the season for sure. Speaking of the second half of the season, the trade deadline is coming up in just a few days from now. There's been a lot of conversations about what the Royals should do. Actually, a lot of conversations nationally about what every team should do, if any team should do anything at the trade deadline, considering how weird of a season it's been so far. With your assessment, considering the Royals are 12-18, they're only 4 games out of the second wild card spot. Again, expanded playoffs this year. Should the Royals be buyers? Should they be sellers? Or should they just completely do nothing and just kind of stand pat?
I'm gonna definitely straddle the fence here because I honestly think that there isn't a wrong answer here. Because of the situation they're in, I can completely understand, if they want to stand pat and just see where they can go. At the same time, to sell a piece like Trevor Rosenthal, who's the name that keeps getting thrown around quite a bit, completely understand. I mean, short of trading away someone who potentially could be part of the future, but that just doesn't happen, even not in short seasons. I think that really that I could see them going either way. And I guess the other aspect of potentially them being buyers, I don't see that happening, but just to give you some perspective, and a quick side note here, Tommy, doesn't it feel weird that we only have about a month of baseball left?
Yeah, it's crazy.
In the regular season, it feels like we just started and we've got, games are only scheduled through September and then into the playoffs. But starting September 11th, the Royals play the Pirates, who are dead last, and I think are they the NL Central? Whatever division they're in, They're in dead last. They play the Tigers, who are the only team, in my opinion, in the AL Central who stink. AL Central is solid with the Tigers, Indians, and Twins, all fantastic ball clubs up there at the top. But they got they have the Tigers, then they have the Brewers, who have been pretty hot and cold. They've got the Cardinals again, and then they end the season with 4 games against the Tigers. So they've got a schedule that could be favorable to really make a little run if they wanted to. So I could almost even understand if they wanted to be buyers. With that being said, I absolutely do not anticipate them doing this, but I would be disappointed if they sold off any major prospects to try to bring someone in for this season. I don't think we're there, or I don't think what we've seen so far warrants that. But more than likely, I think they probably either sell Trevor Rosenthal or they just stand pat and say, hey, look, you know what? We're probably not getting much out of Trevor Rosenthal for, half of a season, essentially. No one's going to give up too much for him. So at this point, we'd rather just ride it through and, hey, maybe we can, see what we can get ourselves into here.
Yeah, the Royals, I'm on the same page with you. They absolutely should not be buyers. The reason for that is because they don't really need to do a whole lot more to make the playoffs. Now, they're 4 games out, but at the same time, I think the Royals could conceivably have a losing record and make the playoffs. And then all bets are off at that point. Everything kind of resets again. So I don't think you need to really be adding to this team for that reason. I especially wouldn't be mortgaging the future for a handful of games to try to make an expanded playoffs in a really odd year. I wouldn't do that at all. I wouldn't trade any of your farm pieces away, your prospects away. I think that's the wrong move, and I don't think the Royals will do that. At the same time, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if the Royals decided to be aggressive sellers. I know Trevor Rosenthal's name has come up quite a bit, and yeah, I would imagine he's probably the most likely trade candidate for Kansas City. But I think that there are some other names that they could potentially consider. One of them is Greg Holland. I think that there are some teams out there, especially those who are going to try to be making a late season push that need some bullpen help big time. Greg Holland has kind of shown a flash of resurgence, and he's not a player that's going to be around the Royals organization for a long time to come. So why not move him? Why not ship him away? I could see that happening for sure. Then another player that, I think you would probably disagree with me on, and that you probably are going to roll your eyes and say I'm crazy, is I'm going to throw out Whit Merrifield as a potential trade target. And the reason for that is just simply because he's not going to be around for when the Royals are going to be in their prime with their young guns. He's 31 years old. He might be around for the first couple of years of it, but they can definitely get a lot of value out of him. And while I don't necessarily know if he's going to be moved this season for the Royals, I can certainly see him being moved in the future for sure.
So I'm going to surprise you a little bit. I actually would not be necessarily against moving Witt. I think the return for Whit Merrifield would be worth going ahead and moving him. But with the exception of, I wouldn't want to move him this year if you don't think you can get the kind of haul in a normal season that he would pull, right? I mean, because if you have to sell him essentially at a discount, then that just doesn't make any sense to me to move him. But otherwise, I think you're right. Now, to me, it's not even quite necessarily, about his age. He's under contract till 2023 with the Royals. So that is actually, a decent length of time left. And really, I think, to me, if you think that, look, they could slide in to the playoffs this year now with the losing record, and I get it's a whole weird situation, but if you think they can slide in this year, by all means, you got to be thinking, hey, look, at least you got to be having conversations about, can this young group come together in 2021 or 2022? And if at that point you still got Whit Merrifield on the roster, I mean, I think that's a no-brainer. So to me, if they think that the team, this group that they have is one or two more young guys of being ready away, which it's kind of seeming like some of the young pieces are, it's some of the older guys that are struggling, not some of the younger guys. Now, again, people are sick of me saying this, has been the inconsistency from the young guys. But if you think that young group is getting dang close, I think you hang on to Whit Merrifield, because 2 more seasons of Whit Merrifield may put you into the playoffs with a good run in 2 years from now. And then if you lose him, that's okay, because he helped you make that playoff run in 2022 or 2023.
The other thing that wouldn't surprise me at all is if the Royals, and for that matter, every team, just decides to not do anything because of how strange everything has been. So the trade deadline will come and go in a few days, and we'll keep our eyes open to see what goes on with the Royals. We're running out of time here on the show. We're going to run very quickly through some Chiefs news, considering we are getting closer and closer to the season. A couple of personnel moves. First off, we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago on the program that Mike Pennel more than likely was going to be facing some kind of suspension for the Chiefs. Steve Spagnuolo mentioned that a couple of weeks ago. Turns out he will be suspended the first 2 games of the season. How big of an issue is that for Kansas City?
Pretty much no. I don't think it's an issue at all. I mean, I think he's a great player, and everybody has heard me many times say how much I like big Mike Pennel. But, I mean, 2 games, in my opinion, the defensive line is one of the positions that has the most depth on the team, and they can certainly, especially the nature of that position, rotating guys in, packaging, you can move guys all over the field to kind of make up for a guy who really was only rotating in anyways. It sounds like from what I read, I think he was suspended for I'm going to use the term performance enhancing, a banned substance anyways. He pretty much apologized, said that he didn't know how it got into his system, but he takes full, he said, but hey, I'm supposed to be responsible for that. So that's on me. I apologize, but doesn't know what it was. And you know what, to some degree, especially if it's only 2 games, I wouldn't be surprised if whatever the details were probably was something that may show up in, some of these sports performance, creatine mixed with obviously it's the other things. Creatine's fine. I'm not trying to suggest that he was just taking creatine, but, all these, max performance type supplements they're taking, you just got to be careful. And I think probably that seems to be what happened.
So the Chiefs will be without Mike Pennel for the first 2 games of the season. And of course, Bashad Breeland has been suspended for the first 4 games of the upcoming season. For Kansas City, another personnel move, the Chiefs have signed former Dolphins safety Adrian Colbert to a 1-year deal. I'm assuming that this is primarily just for depth at that position. I don't, is he a player that can come in and make an impact for Kansas City?
I don't know a lot about him. I was just kind of looking a little bit up on him before the show. It looks like he, spent last year in Miami and the 2 years before that in San Francisco. He started 5 games for Miami, started 6 games a piece in both the years he was in San Francisco. probably not, probably just a depth piece, maybe I'm sure probably a special teams guy, a safety position is a good position that can kind of be a jack of all trades on your special team. So I think you're always kind of looking there. With that being said, I still think this idea of Tyrann Mathieu potentially playing in the nickel some while Bashad Breeland's out, this may kind of lend more credence to that they are looking for a couple of guys to provide depth at safety, knowing they may have to use, the Honey Badger in the nickel or potentially all over the field. I think the guy's talented enough. He could probably play true corner if you needed him to. I don't think that's the ideal situation, but I think that Adrian Colbert could be part of that scenario as well.
It's a little surprising to me that the transaction they made was to sign a safety, considering I don't think, obviously there are issues. Bashad Breeland is suspended and all of that. But if I was going to sign, a player, I would sign a cornerback. I wouldn't sign a safety. There's a lot of depth at safety, but clearly there's something there that we don't know about, that the Chiefs thought they needed this guy to come in and contribute this upcoming season for Kansas City. So that's the big interesting signing for Kansas City coming up is Adrian Colbert signed to a 1-year deal. The other Chiefs news that we could probably talk about a lot longer, we're not going to touch on it though, but it's worth mentioning, is that last week the Chiefs did announce that they are going to be prohibiting any kind of Native American imagery at Arrowhead. That includes headdresses, it includes face paint that resembles any sort of Native American face painting, and that they're also going to be reevaluating the tomahawk chop for the future. Your thoughts on this move by Kansas City?
Predictable. I think we kind of all thought that might be the approach they take, to kind of, silence some of the discussion about whether the whole team name and the stadium name is appropriate. That's kind of just seems, and also probably should have been fairly predictable for all of us that they do it in a year when there's going to be limited fans, kind of an easy way to ease it in. It gets, honestly, this probably would have been big news in 2019 had they made the decision in 2020. That is a small little glimpse of news that nobody even, I don't think, really focused on. So not really surprising at all.
It could easily be a slippery slope, though. So definitely something to keep our eyes on. If the imagery is the first to go, then maybe this time next year we're talking about a change in the stadium name or a change in the team name. I mean, I wouldn't advocate for that, but you never know in today's day and age. Things like that can happen. But that is the big news from Kansas City, is that for this upcoming season, no more Native American imagery in the stadium for fans that are there.
Real quick, I'll add the one other interesting Chiefs news is Mark Donovan said today that they are working on making Arrowhead a polling place for the upcoming elections, which I think is absolutely brilliant. And I'm surprised more, and maybe they have, and I just haven't heard it because I'm obviously just locked in on Kansas City stuff. But, having big outdoor venues like that available to set up to do polling when we're worried about people being inside, I think that makes a ton of sense. So I hope they get that worked out, and that would be pretty cool of the Chiefs to be willing to host something like that.
Yeah, I had not heard that. That's a pretty cool deal if they're able to make that happen. Let's very quickly get into our Wichita Whip Around here on Keeper of the Games. We started the show talking about sports being canceled in Wichita. We're going to wrap up the show by talking about sports being canceled in Wichita, this time at the college level, as the American Athletic Conference announced that the spring sports season will be postponed until 2021. So that means volleyball, and specifically that means Wichita State University volleyball will be postponed until the spring of 2021. Now, here's the deal. I think for a lot of schools and a lot of programs, there's not a ton of focus on volleyball, especially schools that have pretty dominant football programs. Mm-hmm. But at Wichita State, volleyball by far is the most popular fall sport on campus because there's not a football team. So there are a lot of people that go to Charles Koch Arena to watch volleyball and the Shocker volleyball team play. They're not going to have an opportunity to do so this year.
Yeah, I love that they're at least able to kind of go ahead and start forming that plan for spring. I think a sport like volleyball you can move it to a different season a little bit easier than you can football or some of these other sports that, need weather and a short turnaround type thing that doesn't quite correspond. So, obviously incredibly disappointing that you don't have that in the fall, but at least it looks like those young women are still going to have that opportunity to play in the spring, and hopefully everybody can go out and enjoy then.
You got to wonder, though, if they move it to the spring, how is that going to be able to work out with Shocker basketball, assuming that's going to go on as scheduled in the same location? I mean, there are going to be a lot of scheduling issues, I think, moving forward. I mean, the fact that we pushed everything back so far and, all of this, I think you're going to be looking at some potential issues with the fact that this is going to be rescheduled to the spring of 2021. It's not just women's volleyball, it's also men's and women's soccer that the American Conference announced that they're going to be postponing until the spring of 2021. So it's not just the volleyball, teams in that conference. It's also men's and women's soccer. I would imagine, my opinion is super predictable. We talked about predictable quite a bit. We kind of know that's what's going to be happening, I think, in a lot of cases. And I think you'll probably be seeing a lot more of that come down.
Yeah, like you said, I think that it kind of is predictable, especially as we've talked 100 times about some of the smaller conferences. In American, it sits outside the Power Five, as I think is a pretty well-rounded, respectable, good-sized, good-funded conference. But still just, especially a sport like volleyball, soccer doesn't have the funds to make things or try to make things work in the fall. And we've already seen kind of where everything's fallen outside the Power Five and even within the Power Five. So pretty predictable, I think.
Yep. So that's the big news for Wichita State volleyball fans, that their season will be postponed until the spring of 2021, as announced by the American Athletic Conference. That is our Wichita Whiparound here today on Keeper of the Games. And a quick shout out, by the way, we didn't really get a chance to talk about it much, but a quick shout out to Sporting KC, who we haven't talked about at all on this program. But they played their first game back on the pitch. That's the right term, right? They played
that is right. Pitch. There you go.
There in Kansas City last night. They did not win, but they had fans in attendance, which is pretty awesome. And so Sporting KC, shout out to them for getting back to action.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sporting Park is, I think it's Children's Mercy, is a fantastic venue. So excited to see people kind of back in stands, and hopefully that kind of is a little, model for the people moving forward of, hey, look, we can do this. We got to be smart, but we can do this moving forward.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up the show and move things out, we do want to give a quick, mention. I doubt we have a lot of listeners that are down in this area, but for people that have friends and family down in Texas and Louisiana, obviously Hurricane Laura looks to be a really big deal. By the time this episode drops, the hurricane will make landfall. They're saying Category 4 right now. Definitely a really big deal. So, of course, our thoughts and prayers go out to everybody down there impacted in that region. It seems like just one bad thing after another keeps happening in 2020.
Yeah, if we could just move along to 2021, I think we'd all just prefer that. I don't know. It seems like a lot of mental things for me personally, because I'm not, I have not been affected personally by a lot of the things going on. But boy, it's just, I think, wearing down on a lot of us just to continue to hear, the negativity, and I don't mean that someone is pushing it one way or the other. Just tough story after tough story coming out, and I think we're all just ready for a little bit more normalcy in our lives.
Well, now's the time for community for sure, and to come together for sure. So thoughts and prayers go out to all of those impacted by that hurricane that's going to be making landfall here in the next few hours from the time of this recording. So thoughts go out to them. That's going to wrap things up for Keeper of the Games here, this edition on National Dog Day. Don't forget to hit subscribe. That way you'll get a notification anytime we have a brand new episode of the podcast. That way whenever we have a new show, and you can listen to it right there. You'll get a notification on your phone. You can listen on platforms like iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and many more. Of course, you can watch full episodes on YouTube and on Facebook, and also on our website, KOGpod.weebly.com. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at KOGpod. That's at KOGpod. It's kind of hard to give that closing when I'm scratching my dog's ear right now. But no, definitely connect with us any way that you can. And of course, you can connect with us individually. Weston, what's your Twitter handle?
At WMills94.
All right. And you can hit me up at Tweets from Tommy. Until next time, you have been listening to Keeper of the Games. For Miley, for Lucy, for Weston Mills, I'm Tommy Castor. We'll see you later.
Take care, guys.
You've been listening to Keeper of the Games with Tommy Castor and Weston Mills. Don't forget to subscribe, download, and listen on all major podcast platforms like iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and more. Find the podcast and videos on Facebook and YouTube at Keeper of the Games, and follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at KOGpod. That's KOGpod.